So I want to start out today by doing a little bit of an activity. So how many of you guys are comfortable with maybe being a little bit open right now? How many of you guys are comfortable with maybe being a little bit, revealing a little bit about yourself that maybe some of your peers don't know? Because this activity, I'm gonna ask that everyone, Jack's like, I'm ready. I'm gonna ask that everyone take a part of this, student or non-student. And it might be a little bit uncomfortable at first, okay? So the game is stand up if. It's very simple. I'm going to say a statement. I'm going to say stand up if, and then I'm going to say something. I just heard someone go, ugh. I'm going to say statement, stand up if, and if you have done that thing or you relate to that thing, I want you to, in front of everyone, very proudly, stand up. Are you guys down with that? Yes? All right. So let's try this. Let's start off with a fun one. Not a fun one. Let's start off with one to get you guys ready. So if you are currently in the chapel at Boise Bible College, stand up. Poor Mr. Russell over there on his crutches. All right, you guys can sit back down. So you get the idea, right? Now let's get a little bit more intimate, okay? Stand up if... And I want you to be brutally honest here. We're all friends in this room. We all know each other. Hopefully this won't change the way you view each other. But stand up if you have ever, at any point in your life, scratched your armpit and then smelled your hand. Some of you guys stood up way too confidently. All right. There's a lot more dudes than girls. All right, sit back down. Sit back down. All right, I hope you guys are getting a little bit of a taste of what's going on right now. All right, next one. Stand up if you're currently in college or beyond college and you still regularly pick your nose. See, yeah, there's that tension. There's that tension there where people are like, I don't know if I want to stand. I guarantee you some of you in here are lying. All right, sit back down. Okay, this one's not as intimate, but stand up if you have ever not turned in an assignment or finished an assignment in order to get extra sleep. There you go. Professors, look around. These are your deviants. All right, sit back down. All right. Stand up if you have ever put on an article of clothing backwards and gone most of the day wearing it like that. Okay, I'm good. We're good. All right, everyone sit back down. One that's a little less close to home. Stand up if you've ever gotten shamed for putting creamer in your coffee. It's good both ways. It's good black. It's good with creamer. As long as you like coffee, that's totally fine. All right, sit back down. All right, stand up if you have ever seen Mr. Grove in anything other than that outfit he's wearing right now. I just want to point out that's about 50% of the room that has never seen the true you, Grove. All right, take a seat. Now, while this is fun, these next couple questions are going to get a little bit more pointed. And they're going to get a little bit more specific. And they're going to get a little bit uncomfortable. But I ask that you guys would still stay committed to this game that we're playing. And if you relate to these statements, please stand up. So, stand up if there is something about yourself that you've ever wished that you could change, that you have no power over. That's a lot of people. All right, sit back down. All right, stand up if you are in a really difficult season of your life and you really wish that your problems would just go away. Okay, sit back down. The last one, stand up if you've ever felt insecure or shameful about some part of yourself that you have no control over. Look around the room for a second. That's a question that we're not very comfortable to ask a lot of times. A lot of these questions are questions that we're not comfortable to ask a lot of times. You guys can sit back down. But I just want you to realize that in that moment, you guys, that feeling that you just felt is called vulnerability. And it's easier when it's done in a group. If only one person had stood up, boy, that person would have felt awkward. I guarantee you that everyone else in the room would have been lying, but it still would have been awkward and it still would have been uncomfortable. But that feeling that you just felt, that feeling of vulnerability, I want you to hold on to that, okay? So take that, I want you to put it on the wall and just pin it, and we're going to come back to that later. But right now, I want to do a little bit of a recap of some of the things that we've already gone through. So for the beginning of this semester, this is only the third chapel that we've had with a speaker. Last week was Spiritual Conversations. I hope that went well for you guys. Did it go well? Yes? Good conversations, I hope. But the first week, Dr. Voorhees came and he spoke to us, and he gave us kind of a great opening on this. We're talking about this mantra that's said a lot in the Christian church. And you've probably heard it before, but it is in essentials, unity, in non-essentials, liberty, and in all things, love. And so the theme of chapel this year being called out, we wanted to take that and look at it and see how are we called out in light of what this statement says. So first, Dr. Voorhees came forward and he talked about that statement, in essentials, unity. He said that we're called to unity, and he was able to tie that to faith. So he gave us this point of reminder that in the things that we agree with and the things that we build the foundation of our lives upon, that's something that we get to call faith, and it's something that is best shown through the way that we live out our lives in faith. That means that you guys being here right now, are showing faith. There are a lot of people that could be in this room right now that aren't. For whatever reason in their life, they never got here. But you guys, by living out your faith, are here. And so in essentials, unity, have faith. Good job, I'm proud of you guys. The next week we moved on to the next chapel, and Dr. Christensen came up, and he talked about that next part, that in non-essentials, liberty. And we related that to the idea of hope. We're called to liberty and we're called to hope. And Dr. Christensen walked us through this idea that in the non-essentials, the things that maybe aren't as important, we need to have liberty. We need to have this ability for open discussion, and not just for the sake of open discussion, but for the sake of growth and for the sake of change. And through this, we're able to look at our lives and our futures and the future of the church and the future of everyone else in the church in a poignant, truthful way, and with hope. And so we have those first two, in essentials, unity, in non-essentials, liberty, and we move on to this last section, in all things, love. Now, this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, because for the last probably 10 years, I have wrestled this idea of what is love. And when I say love, I'm talking about the all-encompassing idea of love. I'm not just talking about that like mushy-gushy feeling you have for that person that sits in your classroom that you just can't seem to talk to for some reason. You guys, there's not that many students here. Just do it. It's not that hard. And I'm not just talking about friendship, like love with friends and love with your family. I'm talking about all of it. Love encompassing all together, in all things, love. And when I was first assigned this topic, I could not help but think of one of my favorite theologians. One of the people who, and this is a modern person. They're still alive today. It's not someone that has written a book a long, long time ago that died. It's someone that's still alive today. And they have said some of the most pointed statements that have guided my life in some of the toughest times. And that man's name is Michael Scott. From the hit television show The Office, there's a particular episode where he is confronted with the idea of love. And in his idea, the opposite of love is fear. And so he comes to this pointed question where he says, would I rather be loved or would I be feared? He said, easy, both. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me. Now, clearly that's a joke because he's not a real person and he's certainly not a theologian. Take anything else that he says and just throw it away because he's kind of dumb. But I still love that idea of love, right? It's something that we've all thought about. It's something that we've all kind of hung on to. And when I dove into this topic, I thought, well, where in Scripture do we see love most shown? And there are a ton of amazing love stories all throughout Scripture. There's a ton of amazing relationships that show deep and true love. There's Abraham and Sarah. They went through a lot together. There's the very classical one of Ruth and Boaz. But I want to touch on one today that I feel like gets left out a lot. One that isn't really touched on quite a bit. One that has very, very few pointed bits in its actual book that talk about the legitimate love story part of it, but that is the story of Hosea. I love the story of Hosea. So if you have your Bibles, it'll be on the screen as well. We're going to be hanging out in chapters 1 and chapters 3 as well. We're not going to be there very, very much, but I think it's good to have a paper Bible in front of you. But just a little bit of recap on the story of Hosea if you don't know anything about him. Hosea was a really, really well-respected prophet back in the Old Testament. So, he was known by many as a man from God. So not only back in this day were prophets like big stuff, they were almost like celebrities, right? So they were known far and wide. They were the conduits of God, right? Everyone knew of God and his people, right? The nation of Israel was still around. It had been around for a long time, and prophets were something that was kind of a big deal. And so he lived in the northern kingdom of Israel, and they had already broken off from the southern part, which is now Judah. And he had a very, very difficult job. See, Hosea was chosen to be a prophet and to speak on behalf of God during some really troubled times. He found himself being the speaker for much of what God wanted to tell his people during the reign of King Jeroboam II. He was a bad king. He didn't do things very well. Not only was he a poor king, but the nation itself was falling into disarray. With Jeroboam's poor leadership, Israel found itself in a bit of a push and pull with God. So all throughout the Old Testament, God's relationship with his people and his relationship with us through proxy is lined up with the way that he interacts with Israel and the way that Israel interacts with him. And there's a lot of ping-ponging back and forth. And the book of Hosea is no exception. There's a lot of cycles of redemption and falling away and redemption and falling away. And at this point in time, the book covers about 25 years of Hosea's ministry, but Israel was not doing so hot. They were disobedient. They were unruly children of God, constantly in rebellion, constantly disobedient. The nation of Israel was not necessarily an easy place to be if you were a speaker for the Almighty. And it got even harder because around the year 722, the Assyrians came in and made things even more difficult, and life just got really, really hard for Abraham. And in the midst of all of this, Hosea was called to speak to these people of what God had said. I don't know about you guys, but I would not want that job in that particular era. We talk about how ministry is difficult in the modern American culture all the time, but back then, I don't know if I would have been up to the task. So Hosea finds himself in kind of a really difficult situation where God decides to use his entire life as an illustration for his relationship with us. And so what he does is he comes to Hosea in chapter 1, and it starts off with one of the greatest love stories I think I've ever heard. So starting in Hosea chapter 1, verse 2, it'll be up on the screen as well, it says, "When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, 'Go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord.' So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son." Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I wanted to give a pitch for like a rom-com, I would not go into the conference room pitching this. Okay, so we have a guy, right? First of all, he's a prophet. And he marries, get this, an unfaithful woman. That probably wouldn't do very well as a blockbuster or a summer movie pull-in. But that's still what happens. God comes to Hosea and he says, "I want you to go and I want you to marry a promiscuous woman." In some texts it says a harlot or a woman of harlotry. If you look at the original text, the word that's used to describe her literally means fornication. And so what God is saying is, hey, Hosea, you who is a righteous man that I've chosen to speak on my behalf, I want you to go and specifically find a woman that's going to sleep around. I want you to go and find someone that's going to be unfaithful to you. I want you to go and find someone that's going to be so difficult to be married to, and I want you to love her. And there's no fighting from Hosea. There's no pushback. At least there's no record account of it. And he just goes straight and he goes, all right, I pick her. Her name's Gomer. First of all, don't name your children Gomer, especially if she's a daughter. This is my daughter, Hannah. This is my daughter, Sarah. This is my daughter, Gomer. But needless to say, Hosea goes, and he loves her. And he was with her for quite a long time, long enough that she bore him a son, right? And as the story kind of goes on, God uses Hosea and Gomer's life to illustrate this tension back and forth between a disobedient Israel and an extremely loving God who will not give up on his people over and over and over again. And he even goes so far as to name his children things that directly correlate to the bad things that Israel has been doing in light of God. But all throughout it, Hosea is shown to be a faithful, loving husband. We're going to get back to them a little bit later, but this idea of love, when I was reading through the story, I was like, okay, love. How do I best express this idea of love? Because that's the thing, is in all things, love. And so I thought about what's the thing that I most recently could say that I loved? I know, there was this fish, okay? So a while back, I got the chance to go over to the Oregon coast, and I got the chance to speak at this camp. But when I did it, I had this sermon illustration that involved a little fish bowl. And so I bought like a legitimate fish bowl, and I filled it with water, and I had little fake fish in it. But when the weekend ended, I came back home, and I still just had this fish bowl, and it was empty. And I was like, I should probably do something with this. So if any of you guys know my girlfriend, her name is Emily. She's amazing. She's wonderful. If you see her, she's not here today, say hello. Tell her that I said she's beautiful. I'll get brownie points. So. But I had this fishbowl, and I said, Emily, I don't know what to do with this. And she's like, can I have it? She's like, I've always wanted to have a fish. And I was like, sure. So she took it back to her apartment and her roommate, and they talked it out, and they talked about this commitment of, are we ready to bring a child into the house? I don't know if we can care for it. There's so much. But they decided they're going to do it. So the next day, Emily and I go to PetSmart, and I just have this fishbowl in my hands, and I walk out. And we decide to pick this betta fish. It's this beautiful fish. We name him Joshua. Oh, a beautiful name, Joshua. I don't know why we named him that. But we took this fish and we bring it to the counter. And the woman at the counter was quite hilarious too, because she was a self-professed betta fish breeder. And like she would specialty buy fish just to breed them to make them more beautiful. And so we were going through and she kept giving us tips about how, well, if you're going to care for this fish properly, you need to have like a heated tank that's got a circulated filter in it. And I'm just sitting there like taking this tank, putting it behind my back. And it spawned this new phrase with Emily and I, because the woman prefaced every single sentence she said with, as a breeder, I would do this. And it made sense a couple times. She said, as a breeder, I would choose this tank. As a breeder, I would choose this food. But then it went to like, well, as a breeder, I like to eat oatmeal for breakfast. And so it's just kind of an inside joke that we have where it's like, well, what service do you want to go to? Well, as a breeder, I would like to go to the 10:30 service. But regardless, we got this fish, and we were super excited. I mean, like I'm driving, she's sitting in the car, she's holding this little fish in this tiny little plastic cup. And we get back, and we set it up, and her roommate already has like these specialty rocks for the bottom of the tank, and we pour this fish in, and all three of us just kind of sat there on the counter, like leaning over, staring at this fish like point blank. This fish must have thought we were crazy. But we're just sitting there staring at it, and I thought in my mind, I love this fish. 2 weeks later, some of you know where this is going. 2 weeks later, Emily and I are in the car, and she gets a call from her roommate. And her roommate says, hey, have you seen Joshua? And she says, the fish? In his bowl, right? And I had this moment of panic. I was like, where else would he go if he wasn't in the bowl? And she said, yeah, I just can't seem to find him anywhere. He's not in his bowl. And we both kind of looked at each other and we're like, that's not the news you want to hear when you're talking about a fish. So we get back to her apartment. We go inside. We look at the bowl, and sure enough, there's no fish there. I'm like, well, how did this happen? And so I'm looking around the bowl, and I see these specialty rocks that her roommate had were just a little bit too big, because a wedge between the bowl and the rocks was Joshua. And I had this moment where I was like, oh, that's so sad. And so the very next thing to do, we scooped him up, we put him in the toilet, we said a few words, I played taps on my phone, and then we flushed him down the toilet. And I loved that fish. But let me tell you what, I slept totally fine that night. And I had this moment where I was prepping this, and I thought, well, I could say that I love that fish. But I also say that I love my mom. And if I found my mom like that, and we had to flush her down the toilet, I probably wouldn't sleep very well that night. So we have to talk about, what are we talking about when we mean love? There's a couple of words for love. If any of you have been in Mr. Russell's Greek class, there's a lot of different definitions for the word love, especially in the New Testament Greek. And so I want to go over a couple of them. The first one is phileo, friendship. It's the idea of brotherly love. That's a love that you have because you have it in common with someone. You have this type of love with a lot of people in this room right now. You have a lot in common. You get to hang out a lot. And it's a love based on, I love you because of all the things that we have to talk about. I love you because of all the things that we have in common. I love you because we both read the same books. We both play the same games, whatever it is. I love you because this ties us together. That's this idea of this phileo love, this brotherly love. We jump on to the next one, and this is storge. And this is most closely tied to parental love. This is most usually associated with the idea of a parent and their love for their children. I love them because they're made of the same mold as me. I love them because, it's just a smaller version of me, right? And when I was going through the Greek, I actually sat down with Mr. Russell, and he pointed out this is actually where we get the word stork. Like a stork brings a baby to its child, and in that moment, a bond is formed, and love happens, this idea of storge, love. The next one is eros love. This is the one that our culture loves. They love this idea of love. This is what I like to call feeling love. It's mostly associated with things like sexual attraction, physical attraction. If you've ever seen a movie and they're like, I saw this person across the room and I just got these butterflies in my stomach. Where did that saying originate from? But that is eros love. It's this feeling of you look at this person and you see their beauty and you see the magnificence that God has made them and you say, I love them because of this feeling I have towards them. And all of these types of love are good. They're good. You need to have these in your life. You need to have these to have strong, beautiful relationships. But the type of love specifically that I'm talking about here, this in all things love, is the one that you're probably most familiar with, and that's agape love. This love is unconditional. It isn't based off of anything the other person does. It isn't based off of any kind of thing the person can do for you. It's love because you choose to love. That is agape love. I find the best way to exemplify this is in the way that Jesus talks. So there's a couple of examples of this in Scripture. This type of love is so powerful that Jesus talks a lot about it using this specific word. The first one comes up in Mark chapter 12. What you need to know about this love is that this love is not only the first and greatest commandment, but it's also the second. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no greater commandment than these. This love is so powerful, this unconditional love, that it's literally the greatest commandment and the one following it. I would pay attention. The second one, this love lets people know that we are followers of Christ. It's by this that we know. Sometimes you hear, they will know we are Christians by our love. A new commandment I give to you, he says in John. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. This is how the world is supposed to know that we're Christians, by the way that we love, this different way that we love, because we're not supposed to love people based on what they can do for us, based off what they can provide for us, based off their usefulness. We love them because we do, and that's how people know that we're Christians. The next one, as we move on to the book of Matthew, this love is so powerful that it's even for those that we may not like. In Matthew chapter 5 of the Beatitudes, it says, "You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you," this is Jesus talking, "love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." Love your enemies is not a statement that we're very comfortable with. It's not something that we like very much, but we're still called to do it because that's what this kind of love entails. And the last one is that this love is so powerful that it's worth dying for. We see that in John chapter 15. He says, "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." This love is so powerful that it should compel us to be able to give up our life if the situation called for it for our loved ones. And I point out all of these things because I think that this love has something that ties it all together. The reason that so often when we say love, we can mean 100 different things. I didn't agape love that fish. Otherwise, I would have wept a lot more in bed that night. But I do agape love a lot of things. And the reason behind it is because of the very thing we did at the beginning when we first did this, is that idea of vulnerability. It is impossible to have true, deep agape love without vulnerability. Earlier I asked some questions, and if you answered them honestly, you should have felt that. You should have felt kind of like an open nerve. Whether it is about picking your nose or whether it's about being insecure, you should have felt a little bit vulnerable. That is what this entails. And that's what we see here in the story of Hosea. It continues on after chapter 1, and you find out that, surprise, surprise, this unfaithful woman is unfaithful. And she runs off, and it says that she takes other lovers and that she betrays the marriage covenant that she has with Hosea. But that's not where the story ends. In chapter 3, starting in verse 1, the Lord said to me, this is Hosea talking, the Lord said to me, "Go, show your love for your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes." That just has to do with luxury, things like that. "So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley. Then I told her, 'You are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will behave the same way towards you.'" And in this, we see this agape love. Because Hosea chose Gomer. God didn't say, "Hey, see that specific unfaithful woman? Go marry her." He just said, "Go and marry an unfaithful woman." And Hosea went out and he looked at Gomer and he said, for whatever reason, he said, "I choose you. You are the one I am to love." And that didn't change when she was unfaithful. That didn't change when, even after they had lived together and been married and had kids, when she ran off and was unfaithful, he still said, "No, I love you because I choose to love you." This is why I see this as being the greatest love story in all of Scripture. For me, at least. This would make an amazing movie. It wouldn't make any money, but I would watch it over and over and over again. And guys, we're called to love this same way. This is the whole point. To love is to be vulnerable. When I was doing some digging on this idea, I came across this book. I've been reading a lot of C.S. Lewis lately. He has this great book called The Four Loves. And he talks about these 4 styles of love. And there was this one particular quote that I came across that I could not get out of my head. And when you love someone and you show love in your life, and whatever that is, this is exemplified. He said, "There is no safe investment when it comes to love. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even an animal or a fish. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your own selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The alternative to tragedy, or at least to the risk of tragedy, is damnation. The only place outside of heaven where you can be perfectly safe from all the dangers and perpetuations of love is hell. To love is to be vulnerable. And I want to cap this off by coming to one of the most famous love passages in all of Scripture. And that's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It's called the love chapter. I don't think I've ever been to a wedding where this particular passage was not said. But Paul here literally lines out and he explains how this applies to our life, how this love falls down into our life. It is to be vulnerable. And I had this moment where I was reading this, and I remember I sat down with Vance Russell, and I thought, I don't quite know how to convey this idea. And he said one thing that he's always done is that he's taken his name and replaced it with the idea of love in here. And if it doesn't line up, then something's wrong. And I did that with myself, and I had this moment where I was like, whew, I'm really bad at this. So in 1 Corinthians 13, it says, "Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails." And I had a moment where I was reading through this and I thought, Logan isn't very patient. Logan certainly is not all that kind. He tends to envy. He tends to boast. He sure is proud. He dishonors others a lot, and he's more self-seeking than anything. I'm easily angered. I keep a very long list of wrongs. I tend to delight in evil more than I rejoice in the truth. I don't always protect. I don't always trust. I very rarely hope, and I suck at persevering. Logan fails. And if you look at this passage and you put yourself in there, insert your name where love is. And if at any point while you're reading that with your name in there, you feel this tinge of, why don't I do that? Because it makes you feel vulnerable. You have to open yourself up to something else other than your own pleasures, other than your own desires, other than what your heart wants to chase after. And what you have to do is you have to put something, anything, above yourself. And we hate doing that because it's so much easier to be vulnerable. Because if we stick our heart out there on the line, whether it's in a friendship, in a relationship, in a parental thing, whatever it is, any kind of relationship, any kind of interaction with another person, you have to be vulnerable if you're going to love them. And it's one of the hardest things in the world. I remember talking to Mike Morris one time about this idea of love. Mike knows a lot about Hebrew, actually, and I remember thinking, what does this idea of love look like in Hebrew? And he said, it's beautiful. The idea of love in Hebrew is presented as a gift. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, when you think of the term love in the Hebrew mindset, it means to literally give someone a gift. And if you were to give someone a gift and then they were to pay you for it, it would no longer be a gift because a gift is free. There's no strings attached. There's no specialty fees that you have to pay. Love is free, and it's not paid for. That's how we are supposed to love, is we're supposed to give it freely as a gift, not demanding any prize in return, being completely vulnerable to the fact that they may say no, because that's what God did for us. I think that Ryan said it best when he came up and did his benediction. We love because he first loved us. God loved us so much that he came down in the most vulnerable form he could possibly think of, and he died for us. And in that, true love is shown. In that, true love is shown more than anything else. And so as we look at this, in essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. But in all things, love. There's a reason that one's last. In all things, love. And if you are to love, you must be vulnerable. So whatever that looks like in your life, in your relationships, maybe that means opening up a bit more. In your friendships, maybe that means being okay when your friends correct you and call you out. Whatever that means in your life, you need to be vulnerable. I want to end on this last quote. This is from the same book, The Four Loves. C.S. Lewis said it best when he said, love is not an affectionate feeling, but a steady wish for the loved person's ultimate good as far as it can be obtained. That's not you. That's someone else that you put in front of you. That's what love is. To love is to be vulnerable. So as you leave today, ask yourself, how can I be vulnerable? You guys pray with me. Father, thank you so much for just the opportunity to come here and to worship together with people of like-mindedness, people that are all towards the same goal, God, but people that ultimately, hopefully, when everything comes down, we love. And I pray and desperately hope that each and every person in this room will be able to be vulnerable with one another, even if it is in just a small way of standing up during a game or being silly and having deep conversations late at night. But whatever it is, God, I pray that love would invade this campus more so than anything, because we are called to be unified in the things that are essentials. We're called to have liberty and hope in the non-essentials, but you call us to be in love in all things. And that's the hardest thing to do of all, God. So as we leave here today, whether it's classes, whether it's work, whether it's just our room, whatever it is, God, make us vulnerable. Give us the chance to love as you have loved us. It's in your son's name that I pray. Amen.